Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Sorry, my name is Sasa. I make amateur teehee videos on Rwandan politics and other geopolitical topics of interest. I'm part of the Rwandan diaspora. Um, I'm an English speaker, part of the diaspora. My family left Rwanda during the Civil War in 1994, and I've just recently gotten an interest in my home country's politics. If you can see in my screen, this is where I come from. It is located in central. This is the country Rwanda. It's a small landlocked country. It's located in Central Africa. It's comparable to size to Haiti or the state of Massachusetts in the United States. It's quite a small country. It's again around Central Eastern Africa in the Great Lakes region. We have DRC to the west of us. That's Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. We've got Burundi to the south, Tanzania to our east, and to our north we have Uganda. Once you get into a lot of the politics surrounding Rwanda, you notice the countries we neighbor are very important geopolitically, especially the relationships we have with them, which are at the moment very poor. Most of the borders at the moment are actually closed. And these borders were closed pre-COVID, so we can't really put it on COVID guidelines. Yeah, so I wanted to make a video regarding an article written by a professor in University of Antwerp. His name is Philip Reitjens. He is, as it says, academically trained in constitutional law. He later pivoted towards the study of politics, especially in the Great Lakes region of Africa. I believe he's been heavily involved in Rwandan politics since the Civil War and genocide. He's of Belgian origin, and I think he's been very supportive of the Habyarimana regime, which, in the current in the current state of things, if you are pro anything Habyarimana regime, you are automatically pegged as a genocide supporter or genocide denialist, etc., etc. Anyways, I'm gonna just call him Mr. Philip because I don't want to butcher his last name. Rentjens, Philip. He recently wrote an article on on a website called African Arguments. And his article was written on November 24th, this year, 2021. And it says, "From ethnic amnesia to ethnocracy, 80% of Rwanda's top officials are Tutsi." So we will just go together and read some of this what he says. I should start with noting that talking about Rwandan politics is really hard. It's very hard to explain to people what happened, specifically in regards to the elite and the political class. What really happened post-genocide, post-war. And this article brings a lot of the dirty laundry that the RPF has really tried as hard as possible. You know, they have lobbyists, they have paid ad agencies. They put a lot of money into their appearance and their image. So this article, I'm sure, is bothering them to a point. Okay, let's dive in. It starts, says, after the RPF, that is the rebel party that took power in 1994. It is the rebel party that is the regime in power currently. One of the things that gives them legitimacy to rule is that they claim that they stopped the genocide, the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsis, and that they came in as saviors rather than invaders or aggressors. So anyways, let's start. After the RPF took power in 1994, it erased reference to ethnic belonging. People ceased to be Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa, but became Rwandan. There was a campaign called Ndi Umunyarwanda, I am Rwandan. This policy of ethnic amnesia was understandable. During the genocide, being identified as Tutsi meant near certain death. The new government therefore sought to resolve intercommunal animosity by simply removing references to ethnicity. Let me just mention for copyright that this article is not under a page, so I'm going to assume it's okay to read out for educational purposes. Okay, so it does make sense. Post-genocide, the RPF decided, you know what, let us create a society where ethnicity is not the key thing that everyone sort of lives under. You know, it shouldn't control your public life. And that made sense. Let's keep going. Whether or not this worked, one effect of this practice is that it has obscured the disproportionate representation of Tutsi in positions of power today. While Tutsi represent 10 to 15% of the population, their elites occupy the vast majority of high-level functions. Despite the outlawing of references to ethnicity, this fact is well known in Rwanda. We recently conducted some research that put specific figures on the phenomenon. And then he goes on to say about how post this campaign of we're all Rwandans, it's taboo in Rwanda to talk about ethnicity. You're called guilty of divisionism or promoting gender ideology, which are both punishable by law. What's interesting, though, is promoting genocide ideology versus divisionism tend to be based on what ethnicity you are. So if you're a Tutsi and you are speaking up against ethnic oppression or ethnic, inequality, you'll get hit by divisionism. You're creating divisionism into the larger society. If you are Hutu, you will always get either genocide ideology if you are under the age. Essentially, if you're a child during the genocide, you will get genocide ideology because, again, you were too young to put a crime on. If you were old enough to hold a crime, in the sense that if you were a teen and they could place any guilt on you, you will always be genocidaire, not genocide ideology. If you are not in the country and you were Hutu, then you become genocide ideology. It's actually quite pathetic how blatant the propaganda they use starts to come out. Secondly, what Philip says, there may be some errors in our findings. Despite his best efforts and approach, the dangers involved in collecting this information on ethnicity may result in some inaccuracies. And this point is really, I think, pertinent post-genocide, because post-genocide, it sounds like Rwanda has become more obsessed and actually more aware of how ethnicity impacts their society more than ever. And then he says, finally, this exercise or this investigation, it took them several months to complete. So it's not a full up to date. He lets us know, which is, yeah, which is good. So the findings for the investigation, they do actually have a PDF that comes with it. I hope my my page is still recording. And this one, it's in French, but I think you can sort of get the gist of what it is. It tells us the name of the person, the function in government they have, and again, I believe adhesion politic would be like the political party they adhere to, their ethnicity, and the region the region they originated from. This will become very, very important. I'll come back to it, but we'll go back to the article for a second. Okay, the findings. We listed 209 office holders we deemed to be among most senior in the country. We then attempted to determine their ethnic identities, which in Rwanda is passed down through the father. Of the 2005 senior figures whose backgrounds we could confidently ascertain, 166 were Tutsi and 38 were Hutu. So on that parental, that ethnic identity, it is through the patrilineage line. So that means if your father is Tutsi and your mother is Hutu, you're automatically considered a Tutsi within that societal, like a system. If your mother is a Tutsi and your father is a Hutu, then you are a Hutu. So these ethnic, sometimes these ethnic identities are silly and really odd because they no longer make sense, but they're still relied on anyways. So this is a ratio of 81 to 19 overall, but different areas revealed variations. 66% of the 29 members of the national government analyzed were Tutsi. 31 of 36 ambassadors were Tutsi, as were 13 of 15 major office holders in the army and security services. And 96% of 27 top positions in major parastatals and public agencies. All of the positions in the senior staff in the office of the president, the heads of major religions, and the top roles in the National Sports Federation and main media houses were held by Tutsi. These trends are found at the local level too, with 20 of 29 identified district mayors being members of the same ethnic minority. While the overrepresentation of Tutsi is clearly significant, it is important not to overinterpret the data. For instance, the ethnic minority is not a monolith. Many Tutsi, not considered loyal to the regime, have not just been excluded from power, but jailed, assassinated, or forced into exile. This is very true. There is a YouTube channel called Humus Man Gifts and Umutware. They recently had a full episode on political prisoners who were jailed, assassinated, or killed, or forcefully disappeared. And one of the things you will note from the list of those people is many are of the Tutsi ethnicity. So it's always very important to remember that within this ethno regime, many Tutsis are also persecuted. And let's read this little second part. I'll add on to it. It may also be the case that the disproportionate presence of Tutsi in power is a result not merely of ethnic favoritism, but nepotism. The RPF leadership is mainly composed of former refugees, and most Tutsi in positions of power come from similar backgrounds. Our research found that 147 Tutsi office holders whose origins we could not determine, 72%, which is 106, are former refugees, while 41, 28%, are genocide survivors. This is a meaningful difference, and one members of the latter group have acknowledged and complained about. So this little paragraph is essentially key of the political battle that is going on right now within this political system. We do look at the top. Again, it says 72. You look at the 147 Tutsi holders and the high positions they hold, and you'll say, "Oh wow, the country is highly presented by Tutsis." But then when you look into it, you start to realize even within that the category, it's stratified. There is a caste system within that category. Now, if you listen to Rwandan politics in Rwanda, you will have known that these categories have been named already. And these categories are based on what region did you return from. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick summary. Pre-colonial Rwanda was a feudal kingdom. It was a feudal kingdom which was led by a king who owned everything, etc. Just sort of like how every other complete absolute monarchy was. The king was a Tutsi, and the elite noble class was Tutsi as well. In 1959, there was a class revolution. And we really have to stress on this class part, because the Kigali propagandists and the whole, lobbying, they've really tried to make it seem that it was only a racial uprising, that it was an ethnic uprising, that it was Hutu saying, no, we don't want to live next to Tutsis, period. And a lot of research, a lot of historical researchers, they have shown that no, this revolution was a class revolution. It was a people's revolution. It was the Rwandan feudal society, breaking down. It was the people saying, we are tired of being, living a life of slavery, because feudalism is a life of slavery. You're tied to the land. You grow and labor specifically for the landowner, which at the time were the Tutsi elite. And so when we talk about former refugees, or what you can call them returnees, or those who came back, we're talking about the children of the noble elites who during the revolution, a lot of them, yes, were chased out. Again, they were the rich landowners. They weren't gonna give the land up. So there was a revolution, and the revolution was going to redistribute land, rechange education so that everyone of means could be educated. During the colonial time, education was very much limited to the Tutsi elite again. So the 1959 revolution was a class revolution. And so you have, on one hand, Hutu and Tutsis who stayed within Rwanda. And this is the group that sometimes are referred to as Abasop in Rwanda. And this group were Francophone. And they stayed in the country. And then you have a group of refugees, and this group of refugees is, again, funnily enough, divided based on our neighbors. We have refugees who went to Burundi. The refugees who went to Burundi are also Francophone. So these would be the Tutsi noble elites who went to Burundi, and they were raised within a Burundian system, within a Francophone system. They were Tutsi elites who fled to Tanzania. So these would have integrated within the Tanzanian political system. They would know a bit of Swahili, etc., etc. We had Tutsi elites who, during the revolution, went into Congo. They would have also kept the Francophone system, and would have integrated into the Democratic Republic of Congo's political system as much as possible. And then we have Uganda. So during the Rwandan Revolution, the Tutsi elites that fled into Uganda, again, integrated within the Uganda political system and the Ugandan educational system, which happens to be English. So in 1990, when the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front Army, congregated in Uganda, the is it ancestors the word? The children of the noble elites essentially all came together and created a militia. And the militia organized through Uganda, where the elites of the militia and the leaders of the militia were Anglophones, English speakers. So in October 1st, 1990, the Returnees, the children of the noble Tutsi elite, who in 1959 were some kicked off the land because, again, we're not going to be serfs, and some actually left in an attempt to reorganize and come back, because at the time they were the political and military elite. So they thought, okay, let's leave, reorganize, and we'll come back and we'll take back the country. And those periods, I believe they called their group Inyenzi, which opens another door. God. The amount of doors you have to go through when talking about Rwandese politics is ridiculous. Anyways, the Inyenzi militias during the 70s and 80s would make different hits around Rwanda trying to take back power, but they were never successful until their children in 1990 invaded Rwanda through Uganda. And, you know, through the help of the Ugandan National Army. Well, some say they stole the equipment. Some say that the Ugandan army had no idea what was being planned. Who knows? It's a little bit shady, but that's that. So when we talk about the returnees, we're talking about the pre-colonial nobles. Pre-colonial kingdom was a monarchy. It was an absolute monarchy. In 1959, the monarchy fell. The children of the nobles of that monarchy immigrated to nearby countries. They again reassembled in 1990, and they successfully invaded the country. And in 1994, after the RPF shot down the plane of the then head of state, Juvenal Habyarimana, the genocide kicked off, and most of us who are Rwandan know the rest of where that led. So he then speaks about, I'll take you back to Mr. Phillips' article. He goes back to the dangers of this. And the dangers of this are obvious. Rwanda has, of course, always churns out propaganda that reconciliation of Rwandans is very high, that we're, living side by side, nothing is wrong, and that we're never been as close as possible. But like most people who live there and field researchers see, the contrary is true. Despite the elimination of ethnic categories, most people know very well the positions of power in Rwanda are dominated by Tutsi office holders. Though banned from the public discourse, ethnicity remains a central factor in Rwandan's social identity. Political elites may claim not to see ethnic differences, but most people know better in private. One of the things that is interesting about Rwandan ethnicity is that there is a part of it that is visible. There is a part of it that is about futures. This idea that a person, like, an everyday person in Rwanda has to see leadership identity card to know that the leaders are Tutsi is ludicrous. The idea that you have to see your mayor's identity card to know what ethnicity they are, to know the best schools, you don't have to ask those children what ethnicities they are. The best businesses, you don't have to ask. So this political idea it's sort of like somebody telling you that apartheid South Africa was not apartheid. What I mean is that, oh no, all the leaders aren't white. They may look white, but they're not all white. Like, it's sort of making a mockery of people, because with Tutsiness and Hutuness, to the vast majority, it's not something. It's not something somebody has to tell you. It's visible. It's there. It's in our face. Okay, sorry, a little tangent. Together with other factors, this awareness of ethnic favoritism contributes to the structural violence prevailing in the country today. This concern is not new. Already in 2001, Mahmoud Madani underlined the regime's conviction that Tutsi power is the minimum condition for Tutsi survival. And you see, I've read something similar, but without the word Tutsi, with another minority, in another area, in another country, in another part of the world. This is rule by a minority. And rule by minority, for some reason, when the minority is not secure by that rule, it is savage and brutal. And in the last 27 years of, RPF rule, they have lived by this. Tutsi power is the minimum condition of for Tutsi survival. And some people could say, yes, look at the genocide. But they have created structural violence, structural dehumanizing violence on ethnic basis. It's like, rather than really turning the embers of hate off post-genocide, they've been fanning them, making sure they're always ready. And that is very frightening to me, because looking at Rwandan history, I think anyone understands that once you start to fan those flames, it's very hard to turn them off, and it's very hard to control. And for 27 years, this government has been playing with the lives of everyday Tutsis. It's very scary. In 2008, the U.S. Embassy in Kigali found that 2/3 of 118 senior positions were occupied by Tutsi. The leaked cable warned that, for all the government's exhortations to Rwandans to abandon ethnic identities, the political reality is self-evidently otherwise. It continued that if this government is ever to surmount the challenges and divides of Rwandan society, it must begin to share authority with Hutus to a much greater degree than it does now. I don't even know if this is possible at this point. They have not been able to share authority with the Tutsis who were in the country. With the Tutsis they claim to have come to save. We have examples like the Rwigara family, the Rujugiro. Like, there is no Tutsi family who were elites, who were business or political elites, who are still business or political elites. The returnees have taken position, any resource, any capital, any form of wealth in the country is with the ruling RPF. And so here he says that the RPF thinks outlawing ethnic categories increases reconciliation and helps reduce ethnic animosity. the reality is that many Rwandans feel the government's policy serve to conceal a huge inequality within positions of power and thus adds to ethnic grievances and frustrations. Based on many interviews with ordinary Hutu villagers in 2014, Mr. Chakravarti warned of how feelings of discrimination increase the risk of radicalization among those who otherwise navigate the middle ground and are not radically inclined. My thoughts on this is as a young person who, I was one during the genocide, and so I left Rwanda before I even knew anything about Rwanda. When I read something like this, I'm really saddened, because when you read a lot about the propaganda during the genocide, Interahamwe would create this picture of an apartheid state led simply by a Tutsi elite. And many of the moderates, many of the Hutu political moderates, they came and said, no, stop using that extremist language. It's gonna lead to something. And of course, as we know, it did lead to many people, many families losing their lives. But what disgusts me is a part of that Interahamwe propaganda came to be true. And that insult to me, it's like it's insulting the dead. And now, children who were born post-genocide, their feelings of alienation, their feelings of radicalization, they're not going to come from, Interahamwe radio station. These are going to come from their lived experience of 27 years under RPF rule. That scares me. That, it scares me to a degree that it's chilling. I don't know why they don't see. Let's keep going. This is potentially dangerous. In the 1950s, Rwanda's Tutsi elites denied ethnic discrimination and stressed the country's centuries-old national unity when criticized for dominating positions of power. So this is a song we've danced to. So in the 1950s, the monarchy were told, hey, the country is not equal. There's ethnic discrimination. It's an apartheid country. Again, it's a serfdom, so it's feudalism. It's what you expect. But they said, we want change. And the answer was denial. Denial. In Burundi, the answer was denial and, of course, killing people. Neither ended well. Oh, neither ended well. That's where he ends his... In neighboring Burundi in the 1970s and 1980s, those in power similarly outlawed references to ethnicity in a bid to refute accusations of discrimination. In both instances, elites then opted to cover up and deny ethnic inequalities rather than address them, as Rwanda's government is doing today. Neither ended well. So I want us to go back to this document, because I believe it really showcases what people try to explain when we talk about how the RPF, in a way, acts as a colonizing force. Because when the returnees came, there were changes that were made specifically so that the returnees and the refugees could prosper. And Rwandans, would be limited. One of the first changes was, of course, the language change. So, post genocide, in a country where people are traumatized, in a country where people will need communication, the first action was to remove the language of communication and to change it into from French to English. One of the actions that did, that I think is practically the goal of the action, was to delegitimize and remove every educated francophone Rwandan in positions of power. Particularly, I think this was specifically for the Tutsi survivors, which is why it's like an extra slap in the face. At this point, post-genocide, when RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, had taken the country, any educated Hutu man and woman was either labeled Interahamwe, and their life was at risk. Their life was at risk. And which is why many of our parents who fit in that category are refugees. Were refugees because, yes, their hands were clean, but they were educated and they were francophones. And they knew the country. They would place a challenge to the returnees, particularly the Ugandan returnees, who were Anglophone and who put up the new English bureaucracy. And so let's kind of look at this. You can kind of see it, and you kind of start to see certain trends. Again, it's in French, but we can kind of guess what it's saying. We've got President of the Republic, Paul Kagame, FPR, Tutsi, ex-refugee. He's sort of the head and the leader of the Uganda wing. The Uganda wing is the Anglophone wing, essentially. So you've got people like Uwizeye, Minister la Présidence, Permanent Secretary, Hutu, Changugu, NP, that must be their party. FPR, they work with FPR, Tutsi, ex-refugee. Prime Minister, Ngirent, Hutu, party from Kigali Rural. Who do they work with? Cabinet, Rugigana, FPR, Tutsi, ex-refugee. So you start to see a theme. Okay, start to see a theme. A lot of ex-refugee, if you see. Ex-refugee, 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 ex-refugee. I'm actually quite surprised at how many Hutus. You'll notice, though, it's very hard to find. So I do wonder. So you have Paula, Tutsi ex-refugee. Is Permanent Secretary Yves Hutu still FPR? I see. So not only do you have to look at their ethnicity, but you have to also look at their party, because essentially, if they are in FPR, they're like puppeteers, because you're just there as a placeholder. You get your information from, because in Rwanda we do have two governments. We have the government, and then we have the real government, which is the RPF, and they make the decisions where who knows, and then they bring the decisions to the real government, and the real government, it's, yes. Anyways, senior staff in the office of the president, So here's something that's very, like, it stuck out to me. Yes, you can have Hutus and Tutsis who were in the country in various positions. But when you come to positions like this, where it's people who work very closely with the president, then you notice ex-refugees it's like a requirement. Oh, senior policy advisor Anj Kagame. Well, well, well. No nepotism here. None at all. That's the president's daughter, in case anyone doesn't know. Ex-refugee, 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 ex-refugee. And so with ex-refugee, we can also sort of assume that they're the Anglophone speaking ex-refugees. He doesn't really specify. But then you do have, in this section of army and security, he does specify. And that's when you do see those differences I had mentioned earlier. So Commander-in-Chief, the President, Paul Kagame, he's a Tutsi returnee from Uganda. So that's the Anglophone wing. Chief of General Army Staff, John Bosco Kazura, Tutsi, Burundi. So this is actually a very new change recently. A lot of the Chief of General Army Staff used to be Tutsi Uganda, the Anglophones. And so this is a kind of a new shakeup. And a lot of people feel, a lot of Tutsi Uganda power base feels like they're losing a little bit of their hegemony, because some of the Burundians are starting to inch in. Chief of Staff Army, Muganga, Tutsi Uganda. Chief of Staff of Air Force, Mupenzi, Tutsi Uganda. Chief of Staff Reserve Army, Mugambage, Tutsi Uganda. So again, you see in very, very high positions, you see Tutsi Uganda. Deputy IGP, not sure what this one means. Chantal Ujeneza, Hutu ex-FAR. Wow. You know, ex-FAR, I believe, is the ex-Rwandan army. I'll have to look into this, but I've always assumed anyone who's an ex-FAR is very linked to the Interahamwe and the extremists. So, don't know how she got in there. Oh, we've got Tutsi Burundi. Good for them. Good for them. They're getting a little bit of bread as well. Governors. So, we've got some governors, two Hutu governors. But look, FPR, 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 FPR. So this means any form of capital, any form of theft, or any form of corruption still comes back to the party. And so that's when you realize that the ethnic part, it's kind of like just mascot at this point, because they're all still loyal to the main party. Judiciary, I'm assuming. There's one Hutu. Supreme Court. Based on Paul Rusesabagina, Idamanje, all of the sham courts we've seen this year, these are just, again, this is like, I believe they call it kangaroo court. These people, they get a small slip of paper, guilty, 15 years, and they simply read it out. That's the job. Diplomatique. Interesting. PSD. They got put in Abuja. FPR. Who's this? Brazzaville. So, another thing that we can notice is ex-refugee, they get placed in certain really nice places. I mean, I'd like to be in Berlin. as a diplomat. Ankara is pretty nice. Not that the African countries are not nice, but like politically, like politic advantage of certain countries diplomatically has stronger pull than other places. So you see in places like, yeah, it's hard to explain, but there's clearly some favoritism still. But the ex-refugee clearly are running the show. That's not something we have to wonder about. And then what I really like about Mr. Philippe and his research, it didn't just stray in the political field. He went to news agencies, sports agency, religious denominations, media houses. And that's when you really see what you would call the ethnocracy come. Because 10 to 15% of the population cannot represent all intellectual and all non-physical laboring professions. After a while, it simply is what it is. A caste system, an apartheid state, a segregationist society. Yeah, it's very odd to me that this is the system that the Rwandan Patriotic Front has decided should move Rwanda forward, because this ethnic system is unsustainable. And you know what? I have 3 reasons I just kind of want to go through that I think it will not end well. The first one is population size. Again, we know that the Tutsi ethnicity is a minority. And based on the last 27 of that minority rule, it has been very brutal. It has been brutal, it has been unequal, it has been unequitable, and it has been at times very savage. It's been ruled by force, ruled by escalating violence. There is no privacy. The state control is, it's growing, it's creeping. We now know that we have a 10-house system where every 10 homes has a government member who watches and responds. It is a state that is slowly turning into an ethnic apartheid state, but with lots of segregationist aspect to it that just adds so much more damage to it. I was listening to a radio called Radio Kamba on YouTube, and they were talking about how the local very poor people, so the everyday person, they were asking the state to give them permission to emigrate. And that is, asking the state for a right to be refugees. And when you're at that state, it is so sad because first, they've also come to accept that this country is not going to give us anything. But they also understand that they're so helpless that they have to ask the people who are oppressing them for permission to leave the oppression. And so, I mean, that level of destruction to a group of people's soul. And I think when we talk about population size, I always have to come back to the returnees thing. The returnees, yes, are majority in comparison to the Tutsis the Tutsis who are survivors. They're a minority. But still, even together, it's still a minority. That does not explain the level of exclusion that everyone else feels and lives under. And this again always includes everyday Tutsis who are poor, who don't benefit from this segregationist system. Another point of why the system is unsustainable is education. This system, especially when we include how neoliberalism and corruption works, it's bleeding in skilled members of society. And we know if your society doesn't have educated members in it, the civilization, it slowly starts to decrease, just in quality of life, in the quality of thinking. And so now we have a country where essentially a small group of people will only be the only educated members of society, and everyone else will simply be a server. Feudalism again. But feudalism in 2021, what does feudalism in 2021, in the 21st century, look like in a landlocked country with no abundance of natural resources? Our best, like the only resource Rwanda really has is its people. So if you have an ethnic racist government that doesn't invest in those people, where their children do not stay in the country, where their children do not see any worth in investing in the people of the country, which again comes to number 3, the last reason why this ethno system is not sustainable: infrastructure and investment in the country. We've had 27 years of looting out of the country. Ivan, the oldest son of the president, recently bought a lovely mansion for I think $8 million in California. In the meantime, there are classrooms of children being taught under trees on the mud ground. And so, such an inequitable society, their children are not investing into the country. They're fleeing the country, which, it leads to further capital loss. Because I'm willing to bet most of these people's spouses, most of these people's children, none of these people's children are educated in the country. None of their children or their spouses invest into businesses of the country. No. And, we even have example of district mayors sending their children overseas to school. A district mayor. Not to say that a district mayor should not be able to do that, but based on the quality of life the residents of those districts have, where is the mayor getting money to send their child over to the States or to Canada or to China? It's theft. It is theft. But it is unsustainable theft. Because what happens to the rest of the population when their taxes, all of their money is simply siphoned off to Western countries or to the Gulf states so that the leaders' children can have a quality of life that, no, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And as somebody who's not even a politician, as a critic, just as a critical thinker, I think not only is it sustainable, it is very dangerous. And I don't understand why there's no, maybe the old people are beyond waking up, but surely even like Paul Kagame's children, Uwize's children, Mirembe's children, Ngiret, Mpambara, Kagarama, Bayisenge, Ingabire, Viruta, Mukeka, Gatabazi, Dusengiyumva, Ugire Shebuja, Mbonera, Kayisire, Kayumba, Murasira. Do you think your children will be free to walk the streets of a rural village in a rural village in Rwanda? Do you think they would want to have a home next door to the starving people? What is the point of your governance? Why are you there? For 27 years, your government has been looting the country people. It's not that you're looting people who had money. You're looting survivors of a 4-year civil war and genocide. And if you have no shame, perhaps your children do have it, or at least have some fear of the consequences. What is so odd is that I think a lot of children of rich people pre-1990, they're now living a life that they never thought they would have to. Pre-Inkotanyi invading the country, they were living an amazing, privileged life. And I don't think they ever saw it ending like this. Where they're hunted now as genocidaires, where they're killed, where they have to change their children's names. Choose a better future for your grandchildren. Choose a better future for yourselves, for your children. Choose a better Rwanda. Choose a better equitable future. We deserve so much better. We deserve a country where we can all live, where your ethnicity does not impact your everyday life, where your ethnicity does not impact your quality of life, your quality of education, your safety, your physical safety, your privacy, your private property, whether you will live, how long you will live. It isn't fair. No, it's not just fair. It isn't right. It isn't right. Rwanda is for all of us. It is very hard to come to mind to think that, we will have to share a country with Paul Kagame's children and grandchildren. But for us to create a Rwanda, we have to see it that way. I really hope someone on your side, on the other side, hears this and... Anyways, I've been Sasa. I've been reading Philip Reitjens from University of Antwerp's article on Rwanda's increasing racist apartheid state. And he is the first European intellectual and a European journalist who has spoken up. So thank you very much, Mr. Philip.